Welcome to Ideas, a time of conversation about all things board games. Community is built on conversations, and games are built on ideas.
Hey, my name is Brent here on Cloudy with the Chance of Meeples. Welcome to Ideas, a time in which we sit down with game designers, artists, publishers, illustrators in the board game hobby. We talk about how they got their ideas from just ideas into the games that we play and love to spend time with people and doing. And today we have a very special guest from, West Coast. I'm in Central Canada here, but West Coast. Tim Eisner. How are you doing, Tim?
I'm doing great. Doing great. Happy to be here.
Well, thank you so much for joining. And you know what? When I start these interviews, I loved getting to know designers and their journey into this hobby that we share. So, what does your journey look like? Did you play games growing up? Have you been just like in the last number of years or decade? I guess you've been in the hobby designing, but like, what does that look like for you?
So yeah, I played a lot of games growing up with my family. We had a lot of like card games and played a lot of chess with my dad, and me and my brother would, play Risk. And, from early on, we started like making up rules or tweaking things and just being like, oh, let's make some new units and see what they do.
Mhm.
And then in my like teenage years, Magic the Gathering came out and started playing that and started reading some of the like design blogs that the Wizards of the Coast was putting out, and those were pretty influential of like, oh, you're actually designing a game kind of when you're building your deck with Magic. And started playing Catan, and but never really got serious about it until like 2003. My brother and I were like, oh, we were really into drafting Magic cards, and we're like, oh, we should make a drafting game where you just like, you're not like buying packs or anything, but you're just drafting the cards. And we had this like Merchant Princes game that we came up with that had like a simultaneous draft similar to Seven Wonders and other games. And this was probably about 5 years before Seven Wonders came out, but we worked on it a bit, did like 2 prototypes, and then we're like, okay, cool, we're doing other stuff, and just didn't really dig into like, oh, how do you actually make a game? How do you get it farther than just an idea, And so then fast forward to 2012, I was living here in Portland, and I was making artisanal jewelry in the market here in town, and it was really fun, but kind of getting burnt out of like making things, selling it, and then it was gone. So I was like, oh, what's something else I can do that's fun, and make something but have it be able to like reach a little bit broader audience and be able to like keep selling it. And at the time I was playing a lot of board games, playing a lot of Dominion and Race for the Galaxy with the folks I was living with, my good friends. And so I was like, well, I may as well just try game design. Even if I don't make a lot of money, it'll be fun, and I'll learn some stuff. And it just so happened that right around that time was when games were taking off on Kickstarter. And so after I'd been like researching, oh, can I do this? How do you do this? I was like, oh, maybe I actually can do this. Like if I can get a game together. And so me and my good friend Ryan Swisher, who I was living with at the time, designed March of the Ants, got that up on Kickstarter, and that was, a pretty good success for the day. And then sort of it's just been rolling since then.
Wow. So did you have a favorite game as a kid? Like you said, you played card games with your family and then obviously Magic the Gathering, but did you have a favorite game as like outside of Magic the Gathering?
I have always really liked the game Cribbage, the 2-player card game.
Yep.
You can play with more players, but just the race, I really like the blend of like the excitement of choosing which cards you're going to get rid of, and then the excitement of the card flip, and then there's the pegging part where there's the race around the track. And so now as an experienced designer, I keep analyzing that game and being like, oh, how can I replicate that? Because it's got very distinct phases of like, oh, you're selecting your hand, then you're using it to play, and then you're scoring the whole hand in multiple ways. And so it's got these really cool layers for what is pretty much a simple card game, that you can play with a 52 card deck.
So what else are you playing these days? Obviously you're designing, so you're prototyping and playtesting and whatnot, but what are you playing? What games are kind of like intriguing you these days?
The games that have been really intriguing me are sort of in the party game space, or sort of lighter like word games and word association games. So Clover has been one of my favorite ones, just
Okay.
like the space where it pushes your
Yeah.
brain to like what's in the middle of these words, and it's got this very creative element.
Okay.
So been playing a lot of games like that, and another one that I just to go to that's really easy is Silver and Gold,
Mm.
the sort of flip and right
Yep.
where you're filling up your islands, and that's just really elegant, easy to get out, and really approachable with any number of friends. I think because I do a lot of like heavy gaming with my design work, like when I go to play games for fun, it's mostly lighter games.
Hmm. So you said with your friends and stuff. If you meet someone new, and they're like, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" or just striking a conversation. When someone asks you like, "What do you do for a living?" You're like, "Oh, I'm a board game designing. I'm a board game designer." Like, how often do you get like people saying, "Oh, like Monopoly," or like how often do you get those answers? And then how do you like not kind of like smirk and be like, "No, not like that." Like,
Not like that. Yeah. It's here in Portland, I think there's a pretty good gaming community. So most of the
okay.
people I'm meeting locally have like a little more awareness, or like are, like tuned in a little bit to it. So I don't get people of that level, but I do have to sort of explain, what they're like. A lot of times I get like, oh, video games. And I'm like, oh,
Mm.
no, board games,
Yeah.
and they're like, oh, that's really cool that board games are a thing. I'm like, yeah, no, they're a thing. They're really
Yeah.
like, and then just sort of explaining like, a lot of people are like, "Oh, that's a job? You can do that?" I'm like, "Well, yeah, I mean, I guess so. I'm doing
Yeah.
it."
Wow, that's awesome. So, kind of switching gears to this job that you've been doing for how long? 10 years now?
Yep, just about 10 years.
10 years. Um, your first few designs would be like Grim Forest, right?
Yep.
Grim Masquerade.
Hmm.
And then obviously the big one a number of years ago, Wonderlands War. Do you have this like passion for these like fairy tale setting games and things like that? Or like what drew you to this genre?
Yeah, that's a great question. I do really like stories. I'm really into like narrative and theme.
Mhm.
Um, but I think with Grim Forest, that was actually the first game that I started designing. I released March of the Ants before that, but
Mhm.
I've been working on Grim Forest for a while. And that just ended up with the fairy tale theme based on the mechanics. I had like, been reading some books on game design, trying to figure out how it worked. And there was this like, rock, paper, scissors thing of like, oh, you can make a choice and there's three places you can go. And I was like, oh, just lying in bed and was like, what's something that has to do with three? What's something that
Mm.
counts to three, or like, and I was like, oh, the three little pigs, and they could be getting stuff for their houses. And so it just sort of went from there. And then, with the success of that, it was like, oh, these stories are like, they already have a lot of like weight, or people are attached to them. So like designing within that is really fun, and like figuring out like, oh, how do we bring them to life, or how do we
Mhm.
bring these mechanics and make it feel like this is a game in Wonderland? How do we bring some wackiness and some wildness and like embody the characters and bring them to life? And so that's been really fun, and sort of it kept attracting me to working in those types of games.
Do you enjoy obviously then working with your brother on those games?
Oh
How's
yeah,
that?
yeah. Oh, it's great. It's the best. We fought a lot growing up. We were, we butted heads, and we're
Yeah.
just, like brothers typically. But then like, for the last 20 years, we've got along like pretty great, and just like we know each other really well. We're really good at communicating, and we have very similar but distinct still skill sets. So like
Mhm.
he's sort of the bubble burster. I'm like, oh yeah, we can do this and this and this. And he's like, okay, well, this idea doesn't really, it's gonna not really work or apply and this. And so we have a good, like, he's super strong on development, really strong on design as well, but he's always like takes the ideas and refines them, or like dials them down. And I'm more like, I'm just gonna write a bunch of ideas down and some of them will work,
Right.
and he helps bring them to life. So that's been really great. And it's really nice having someone I trust so much and really, connect with and can get along with. And it's just like really easy to be like, oh, yeah, cool. Oh, I can see you're in a bad mood. Oh, you can see I'm in a bad mood. Or like, and just move forward, and not just like get out of
Mhm.
sorts.
Yeah. You guys did Tidal Blades together, correct?
Yep.
Did you have that whole like story, world building, lore, all that like fleshed out when you pitched that to the publisher, or did they add that all?
So that was actually an interesting collaboration. It was kind of the publisher, Druid City Games, had pitched that to, it was like, hey, I want you to work on another game after Grim Forest and Grim Masquerade. And they're like, oh, the artists from Grim Forest, they're really great. Let's all work on a game together. And then they, the artists were like, okay, we're into that, but like we'd like to design a world of our own. And so Mr. Cuddington, the artists did all the world building and design for that world. So we had some like rough ideas of the mechanics, but then while we were building that, they were building the world, and so that kind of informed how the game developed and how it came along. Because we'd be like, oh, are there creatures like this in the world? And they're like, oh, we don't know. Oh yeah, there could be. They're like this. They're like, oh, it's this island realm, so we'll have these different boards that you can move around to and stuff like that. So it was a fun like collaborative process where they were like in charge of the world building, but we were helping sort of like investigate and asking questions about it as we went through the design.
So they came to you with the world first, or you had a concept of like, hey, let's have a game where you're kind of battling for supremacy, and like that's what it is, right? You're trying to be a champion there. Did they have that concept, or like they were like, hey, come up with a game and let's build around it?
Yeah, definitely. It's it's been a while and there's been a lot of other designs since then. But from my memory, we had the initial concept of like, okay, we were gonna have this sort of like hero building thing, and you're going to be building up your, like using dice to grow stronger and getting different attributes that you increase. And I think set the stage of like, oh, well, let's do it here in this world. When we started, it was more of just a generic like fantasy realm or something like that. And then it became, they were like, oh, it could be this tournament that they're having, and gave us the lore of like, oh, there's this tournament, they're getting new defenders for the city, and there's this happening. And we were like, oh, okay, cool. Well, if that's the case, we'll adjust some of these things, and then maybe there'll be monsters that are coming in at some point that you fight and other things you're doing. And so, so we had a rough mechanical idea, but then it definitely adapted quite a bit from there.
How much of a was it to move from Tidal Blades, like the first one, Heroes of the Reef, to the whole campaign? Like how was that journey?
Oh man, it was awesome.
Nice.
Well, it was really fun to revisit that world. Like it's beautiful, it's amazing. Mr. Cutting they did an awesome job like creating it. So it was really fun to go back in there and like explore more of the narrative side. In the first game, we fleshed out the characters. They each have their own abilities and they're doing different things. But in the second game, we were really able to explore more and tell some more backstory. And so it was really fun to be able to go in and get like further involved in the world and really deep dive. The reason I was laughing is because it was a big project. The dungeon crawls are just like, I thought I'd worked on some big games before, but then working on that, it was like, okay, there's 18 scenarios and they're all different. So they're all like kind of their own game. And then we need a system that like brings them all together. So it was really fun and really rewarding. And I'm really glad we got to do it. I think the game's awesome. I can't wait for it to come out, but it was also just a big project.
I bet. Did you do most of like the writing, or was that your brother, or was that like you guys work together, or how did that work? Like the story, I guess.
It was pretty collaborative. It was really collaborative between us and then Mr. Cutting, the artists, and then some of the folks at Skybound Games, Ben Kepner and James Hudson were, sort of kicking around ideas and building it. We had our hands pretty full with design for a while. So we were like, okay, cool, we're checking in. This is the kind of story arc we're thinking. And then they would flesh out a little bit more what the like beats would be, or different places you'd visit in Naviri. And then the Cuddingtons, when it came to the actual writing, I think, it was again a pretty even split between like the three teams of like the designers, the artists, and the publishers all did like took a kind of a third, and then we helped revise and edit and put them back together.
That's so cool. I just love hearing the ins and outs of how these things come, because that's why I do ideas, because so often we just go to a game store and like, oh, look, there's a game, and you throw it on the table, but you don't know the journey that the designers and the artists and like everybody involved went through and went on, I guess I should say, to have that finished product. And I think that's just really cool. I'm a big music guy, so I kind of do the same thing in music on like, oh, we recorded, you know, this riff in this hotel when we are tour with this band, and then the song fleshed out of that, and like I just love that. So I love hearing how these things kind of just like intertwine until the finished product is something that we can play and enjoy and bring people to the table and enjoy these times with them.
Totally. Yeah, it's really cool, like the interplay and like that it's not, you know, especially these big games are not, you know, a lot of them have just one designer's name on them, but a lot of them are just this like, you know, very collaborative effort and very involved. And, you know, and it's like, oh, one idea is kicked here and then that goes over here and inspires something and shifts this. And it, you know, it's like, it's part of the fun for me is especially like game design, you're like, don't really know what the end product's going to be. You're like, okay, we think it's going to be this type of game, but then as you go, it's going to shift and change, and getting to create that with multiple people is part of the main fun for me.
No kidding. So, you know, before we get into your Canopy universe, I'm going to call it a universe because I feel a lot of publishers and a lot of like designers are kind of moving towards this universe of different games. So is there anything further in the Tidal Blades universe after the second Tidal Blades? I know there's the Banner
Festival.
Banner Festival.
I think there will be. I'm not at liberty to say what's coming down the pipeline, but I think there's more to explore in that world, and I hope we get to see it.
Right on. Yeah, and I feel lots of companies, and this isn't a bad thing, they're finding something that really resonates with people, and then they're growing that. You know, obviously you've seen like the Ticket to Ride, you see Azul, and obviously Everdell did a whole bunch of things, and they, you know, even Underdog Games, they have like Trekking Through History and Trekking the World and Trekking Through National Parks, and so you kind of have a universe of Canopy underway. Obviously Canopy came out 3 years ago, 2020?
2021 it came out. Kickstarter was 2020.
Okay. Yep. Right on. And great little drafting game. I will say I've been really digging that.
Awesome.
Just those little like tight decisions, and kind of reminds me like of the decisions that you get in a game like Lost Cities, in the sense of like, man, like what do I give my opponent? Or, you know, obviously that's in Lost Cities, but in Canopy, it's like you always want to look at that third pile, right? Yeah. Like you always want to look, and you're like, oh man, there's so much good stuff in pile number 2. And it's like, that could be garbage there, but I just need to know. And,
totally.
And so I absolutely love that. My kid's been loving that. My wife loves it. And so you now have on Kickstarter Canopy Evergreen. So what's different about Canopy Evergreen compared to Canopy, the original?
Yeah, so there's a couple new things. First off, Canopy was, well, you know, the main core of the design was designed for 2 players. There's a 3 and 4 player variant in there, but it was designed as a 2-player game originally. And so with Canopy Evergreen, I wanted to be able to expand it to make it playable with 2 to 4 players, a lot easier, and just have the deck and everything sort of built around that. And so with that led to the creation of a rainforest map. So instead of just keeping the cards to grow trees, when you get a card, you'll get a token, like a punchboard token that's part of a tree, and you'll start building those up together. So you can build, and that's on a map. So there's a spatial element where you're trying to build trees of different heights next to each other, which will unlock bonuses. So there's just like an extra level of strategy there that is like, you know, my goal with it was to make it like a different game. So it's not just like, oh, is this the same game? Just like new cards. I wanted to stand on its own, but be similar enough so is still, you know, recognizable and people would enjoy it for the same reason. So there's the rainforest map and the buildable trees, and then the wildlife moved into their own deck. So there's now a
Okay.
resource, a food resource that you get with through playing different cards, plant cards that give you food, and then you can spend that to attract the wildlife to your forest, and that gives you a little more control over which wildlife you're looking for and lets you sort of
Hmm.
build up. And there's some like habitat chains of wildlife that want to be connected to each other, so there's a couple different ways that those will score. And so those are the main differences. And then on your forest board, you'll unlock these ecosystem tiles, which are like a permanent version of a card. So the plant cards and weather all go away from your forest, like in the first game at the end of each season.
Hmm.
But the ecosystem tiles will stay in your forest and let you sort of build up and be like, ooh, I'm going to specialize in huckleberries. That's now I know I'm always like my
Okay.
huckleberry sets are going to be a little stronger. And then so there's a little more permanence from round to round.
Okay.
In the original Canopy, only your wildlife would stay and the
Right.
trees you'd have built, but this one has a little bit more interaction of things that will stay and ability to build up some strategies. So
Hmm. Do you find you still have that tense drafting in the 3 and 4 player that you had in the 2 player? I will say this: I haven't played Canopy. I haven't played, or no, I play Canopy. I haven't played I haven't played the 3 and 4 player variant
yep.
because I knew it was designed as a 2 player game. So I wanted to get that like that full effect of this is the space that it was ultimately designed for.
Yep.
How does that drafting mechanism bring those tight decisions in the 3 and 4 player?
Yeah, so it is there's a little different setup, but it does preserve a lot of that tension of the draft.
Okay.
So the way it works is you have there's a central pile that
Okay.
everyone has access to, and then you have a pile that you share with each neighbor. So
Okay.
so in a I'll have a pile on my left that I share with the player on my left and a pile on my right. Every player you look at the pile on your left, that's your first pile. And then you look at the pile in the center, and then you look at the pile on the right. And so you don't share piles with everybody, but you share piles with each person that's neighboring you. And so there's a little different valuation. Like my first pile that I look at is going to be the player on my left's third pile. And so I know I'm like, oh, I
Mm.
could let that build up a little more because they're probably going to get stop on 1 or 2, or are they going to go to 3? And
Mm.
then my third pile is somebody else's first pile. So I'm going to be, I might want to get there to see what they're hiding in that pile or what they're keeping. So it's a slightly, different dynamic than when you just share all 3 piles between the players, but
Right.
there's a nice interplay between the players where there's still ability to track of like, oh, I know you're really into huckleberries, so if I leave a huckleberry in here, you're probably going to take that, or you're probably going to get there. So it's shifted up slightly, but that drafting setup has been working really well in the plays we've done.
That sounds like just thinky and maybe not thinky, but just like those like nice tense decisions. And so I'm excited to see that. As it's wrapping up on Kickstarter in a few days, and how it's received in the coming year, coming out obviously 2024.
Yep.
So will there be another Canopy? Is this something that you would want to, if this goes over well, is this something that you'd want to explore? Maybe obviously you've done the Amazon and then you did the Pacific Northwest, maybe other places in the world, other different climates, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. I think depending on how it's received and how if it's successful, if people want to do it, it's been interesting seeing like, okay, how much of a market is there for a game that's similar but in the same universe, and building that
Right.
out. And but there's so many interested places in the world, and it's really fun like doing research on the different
Mm-hmm.
like plants and animals that live in different places and trying to give slight nods to those with the
Right.
mechanical effects of the cards. So yeah, I'm definitely into it. We have some people being like, oh, you should do one in Australia or do one
Right.
in Southeast Asia, and there's a lot of different cool places. I think the trick for me, I've really enjoyed working on Canopy Evergreen because it's been fun to go back to the same base structure and then
Mm-hmm.
sort of innovate on that and be like, okay, how can we do this slightly differently? How can we adjust this and add some things? But I think I'm like the type of creative who wants to do something new, kind of new each time. So it has to be,
Right.
you know, I have to figure out where I'd want to take it in a, and not just be like, oh, we're gonna do the same game again. It's just new animals. So like
Right.
how to innovate that. And I think I did a really good job with Canopy Evergreen. I'm really excited how it turned out and being able to add the right amount and to make it different, but not change it so it's you're not a Canopy game anymore.
Mhm.
So figuring that out for a future game will be, you know, a puzzle that I'll, you know, have to answer if I get the chance.
Right on. And the one thing that obviously is also congruent, I think that's the word I'm thinking of, similar in both of them, is the artwork by
Yep.
Vincent Dutrait. So when you designed this game, were you thinking in the back of your mind, you know who I want this game to be illustrated by? Vincent Dutrait. Did you kind of have that already thought out when you were designing it? Or at what point were you like, okay, now I need an artist who could do this game justice? Like, how does that look, or how did that look for you being being the publisher yourself?
So there was, yeah, I think it was pretty early on. I actually approached Vincent, maybe that earlier that year, the year before, about a space game that I was working on because I'd seen he'd done some cool illustration on another space game, and he was interested, but then it ended up not working out for that one. So I was like, that's fine. And he guest illustrated one ant for one of our March of the Ants expansions.
Okay.
And so I'd had some connection with him, and then pretty early on in the design process, like as soon as I was like, "Ooh, this is a natural game. It's going to have this organic feel." I was like, "Oh, well, Vincent did that awesome ant. He's also, you know, he's just a great illustrator." So I was,
Mhm.
you know, I was like, "Hey, would you be interested in this?" And he was like, "Yeah, send me a prototype. I'll check it out and see." That's one of the cool things about Vincent and a lot of other board game designers is they, you know, play games or board game illustrators. They play the game. So he's like, "Oh, let me check it out and make sure it's a game and something that I like that I'd be excited to illustrate." And
Mhm.
so I sent him a prototype, and he's like, "Oh yeah, this is cool. Let's do it." So so I didn't know from the beginning, but pretty early on when I was like growing trees, I was like, "Oh, I bet he could just really like bring this to life," and he did. It was amazing.
So how long do you have to like? How long did he need? Like,
Um,
I'm assuming artists nowadays, like the ones that have been like making waves, like an Andrew Bosley, like a Vincent
mhm,
Dutrait, um, that have been, you know, staples in the board gaming hobby. I maybe not Andrew Bosley as much, but like how long was it like we like I need this and he's like, oh no, I'm backed up on project X, Y, and Z. Like how did that work?
yeah, there's definitely a little bit of lead time, you know, like
Mhm.
most artists I talk to are like, "Oh yeah, I'm booked out for the next 6 months," you know, or most of like the big ones like Beth Sobel and other, you
Right.
know, people who are like, "Oh yeah, they do quality, people love their art, they understand board games." Um, and so with Vincent, I was like, "Oh cool, I'm just, you know, luckily it was early in the design when I was like had the rough thing, and I was like, cool, I'm gonna try and do this, you know, early next year." And so I was like, "Okay, you've got like 8 months." And so he's like, "Okay, cool. Yeah, I can get that to work."
Okay.
And then inevitably, you know, like most people, especially as like you know, I was just a one-man publisher at that point. My brother had another job, so he was just helping out part-time. Um, I was like, "Oh, we get, you know, I got to 7 months down the road. I'm like, okay, it's going to be another 3 months out, you know." And
Mm.
then it was like, and then the pandemic hit, and I was like, okay, it's going to be another 3 months out, you know.
Yeah.
So there's some like, you know, and Vincent's he's really fast, he's really good, you know, he's able to
Mhm.
like when he sits down and does it and doesn't have other projects going on, he's like,
Right.
"Oh yeah, here's 5 new animals, here's all the plants, here's," you know, and can like do work pretty rapidly. And so usually it's like I'll get most of the art done, you know, in the months leading up, and then there'll be like a last burst and like, "Okay, cool,
Okay.
we're getting ready for Kickstarter, here's the final assets," you know.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
usually with, you know, a reasonable amount, you're like, "Okay, cool, there's enough to, you know, make a prototype and show people and start, you know, building the Kickstarter page and stuff
Mhm.
like that."
Very cool. Well, as we wrap up, I just got kind of as we finish this off, um, your um your game designer obviously for Weird City Games that you own, right? You're the
Mhm.
publisher, but then obviously you do freelance. So what do you enjoy more? And do you see yourself doing both or kind of focusing on just your own stuff? Yeah, moving forward. Like,
Yeah, that's it.
or at the same time, how do you balance that? Because a game like Canopy, and correct me if I'm wrong, but a game like Canopy is considerably smaller than I feel than that 18 campaign scenario in Tidal Blades. And I can imagine that game and anything in that size would take considerably more time, energy, running into walls, all those things versus a smaller, and I don't say small as in like,
Yep.
you know what I mean? But it's like two, like they're not apples to apples in that regard.
Definitely. No, I got you. Yeah, it's a great question. It's kind of, I've sort of been exploring it from when I started the game design. I did publish my first game, March of the Ants, and then did, licensed Grim Forest to Druid City Games, and then I've been sort of bouncing back and forth doing both, some freelance and self-publishing. I think the self-publishing I really love because I get to control all the aspects of it, and I get to control the timeline, and I, get to work with the artists, which is generally really fun. Also can be like, oh no, it's a whole process, but it's really fun to have the whole, be able to envision the whole project and sort of have that creative control throughout. I do really love working on freelance stuff because then I don't have to worry about manufacturing or logistics, or running the Kickstarter campaigns, which is really fun but also very draining. So I do think it'll sort of be a meld of both going forward. Like I think especially as a smaller publisher right now starting out, like just to keep rent paid and keep the lights on, it's nice to have some like, oh, these are our projects we're doing in-house that we can do, like 2 Kickstarters a year probably is about what our team can handle. And then, have some bigger projects that we're working on, have a little longer lead time, but then it's like, oh, cool, every year and a half, like one of those will like come up and come through and be an extra, like income. And it's fun to, while I do like having the full, creative control of our own projects, it's nice to have like somebody else sort of call those shots sometimes. Be like, okay, cool. I'm just going to do the design stuff and you take care of the rest. So, right now I think our big focus is going to be on doing some, potentially expanding some of those universes that are already out there of like, Wonderlands War, we did an expansion last year, and then, Tidal Blades 2, depending on where that goes, there might be some more content in that. And so I think those will be a little bit easier designs because the groundwork's already been laid for the initial project. And so right now I don't think I'm going to take on any huge big outdoor projects because they do take a lot of time. And so I do want to like sort of right now I'm focusing a little more on building Weird City Games as a company. So need a bit more of the design time for that.
Right on. So needless to say, you're not going to be bored moving forward.
No. I've been trying. My partner's always, I'm like, I'm going to do less projects. And she's like, okay, sure. I believe you. And I'm like, oh, but wait, I have this game idea. Let's do that. Okay. And there's this one, so it's not a problem of lack of ideas. It's just lack of hours in the day.
Yeah. Right on. Well, thanks so much for taking this time. This has been fantastic. Just getting to know you a little bit more and your design history and your design journey and all that stuff. And I'm excited to see what you come up with in the months and years, maybe decades, down the road. You never know, right?
Yeah.
And all the best as you continue to work and build the Canopy Evergreen, obviously wrapping up on Kickstarter shortly, and all the best on that. If someone wants to know more about your work, where can they go? Are you on social media, just online, or how can they?
I'm on Facebook and Instagram, both my personal Tim Eisner and Weird City Games. We both there's accounts for both those there. There's also weirdcitygames.com. And then, as you said, the Kickstarter for Canopy Evergreen's finishing up, so I'm spending a lot of time on that Kickstarter page, and I'll be there for through mid-October.
Right on. So I'm going to post a link to Kickstarter, Canopy Evergreen, and also to Weird City Games website and stuff. So check out Tim's stuff. And yes, I firmly believe that community is built on conversation, just like games are built on ideas, just as Tim has shared over the last half hour. So once again, thanks so much for taking the time, Tim.
Yeah.
That was a mouthful. And if you want to know more about Cloudy with a Chance of Meeples, we're on Facebook, Cloudy with a Chance of Meeples. Till next time, grab your umbrella. The forecast is cloudy with a chance of meeples.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and remember to grab your umbrella because the forecast is cloudy with a chance of meeples.